These Violent Delights, Chapter 26. The next night, Juliet was buried deep inside her head. All those times when she had brushed Walter Dexter off, she could have been gathering information instead. Now it would appear suspicious if she tried sliding back into his good graces. Perhaps this is why people were warned not to burn their bridges, even if it was a bridge leading to a no-good merchant. Juliet stabbed her chopsticks down angrily. Suspicious or not, she needed to get back in contact with Walter Dexter without arousing distrust. And in brainstorming how to do so, no matter which path she went down, all roads seemed to lead back to his son, Paul Dexter. She wanted to strangle herself at the thought. Perhaps I do not have to hunt him down, Juliet thought weakly. Perhaps I am only chasing ghosts. Who is it to say he will even know anything? But she had to try. Everything in this whole bizarre affair was circumstantial. Just because Walter Dexter was supplying the Larkspur didn't mean he knew anything more about the Larkspur's identity and what location than they did. Just because the Larkspur was making a vaccine didn't mean he would lead them into a cure for this wretched madness. Equally, it also meant that the Larkspur could know, and so might Walter Dexter. Dang it. Where are you tonight? At Rosalind's sharp summons, Juliet looked up from her food, stopping herself just a moment before her chopsticks mindlessly closed in air. Right here, she said, frowning, when Rosalind pulled a face that said that she didn't believe her. Really? Rosalind gestured toward the table with her chin. Why'd you ignore Mr. Ping when he asked for your opinion on the worker strikes then? Juliet's attention shot to Mr. Ping, a member of her father's inner circle who used to like asking about her studies whenever he saw her. If she recalled correctly, a favorite topic of his was astrology. He always had something to suggest about the alignment of the Western zodiacs, and Juliet, even at 15, always had a quip to fire back about fate working through science and statistics instead. Right now, he was pouting on the other side of the circular table, looking especially wounded. Juliet winced. It's been a long day. Indeed, Kathleen muttered in agreement when Rosalind's other side, massaging the bridge of her nose. The racket of their private room was loud enough to compete with the rest of the restaurant outside. Lord Kai was on the seat beside her, but these dinners were not opportunities for father-daughter discussions. Her father was always too occupied with other conversation to utter a single word to her, and her mother was taking charge of the second table in the room, leading the conversation there. This wasn't the setting for personal conversations. This was prime time for members of the Scarlet Gang's inner circle to jostle and brag and drink to the edge of death because one another to win favors. Tyler was usually one of the loudest people at the tables. Today, however, he was off chasing rent money instead, as he had been for the past few days. While Juliet was put in charge of the madness, Tyler was running her heiress roles in her place, and he reveled in them. Juliet stiffened each time she heard him yelling through the house, gathering his entourage so they could set out, and it was happening often. It seemed like every minute had a new dodger, a new account going into the red. Tyler would wave his gun and threaten store owners and house tenants until they coughed up the necessary amount, until the Scarlets had made back what they were owed. It was hypocritical for Juliet to be looking down on Tyler for simply doing what was technically her job. She knew, but performing such a job in this climate made her uneasy. People were not refusing to pay now because they wished to rebel. They were simply not making enough income because all their customers were dying. Juliet sighed, twiddling her chopsticks. The food spun before them on the glass turntable, presenting roasted ducks and rice cakes and fried noodles without pause. Meanwhile, Juliet was meticulously picking up servings from the center and bringing them to her plate, putting food in her mouth without really tasting it. It was a shame, really. One glance at the decadent greens of the vegetables, at the gleam of the scaled fish, at the glistening oils dripping off the meat was enough to water the mouths of anyone. Except Juliet had zoned out yet again. Realizing that she was raising the ashtray to her mouth instead of her ceramic teacup, she shook herself back to reality and caught the very last syllable coming out of Rosalind's mouth. Not nearly enough to determine any of what her cousin had said, but just enough to know that it had been a question and something needing a worthwhile answer out of Juliet instead of a smile and a generic inquisitive noise. "I'm sorry, what?" Juliet said. "You were talking, weren't you? I'm sorry, I'm terrible. And she was about to be even more terrible because she would never know what Rosalind had asked. At that moment, her father was clearing his throat, and the two tables of the private room fell silent immediately. Lord Kai rose, his hands clasped behind his rigid back. "I hope everyone is well," her father said. "There is something I must address tonight." Some gut feeling in Juliet tightened. She braced. "Undeniable proof has come to my attention today that there is a spy in the Scarlet Gang." Utter quiet sank into the room. Not an absence of sound, but a presence in itself, like an invisible heavy blanket that had settled over all their shoulders. Even the servers stopped. One boy who had been pouring tea froze mid-movement. Juliet only blinked. She exchanged a glance with Rosalind. It was almost common knowledge that there were spies in the Scarlet Gang. How could there not be? The Scarlets certainly had people among the common ranks of the White Flowers. It wasn't too much of a stretch to consider the White Flowers had invaded their messengers, especially given how often their people got the jump on the Scarlet Gang. Lord Kai continued. "There is a spy in the Scarlet Gang who has been invited into this room." For a short, horrific sound, Juliet felt a pang of fear that her father was referring to her. Could he have been found out about her association with the White Flowers, with Roma Montagov, and taken it the wrong way? Impossible, she thought, clenching her fist beneath the table. She hadn't given away any information. Surely something had to have happened to damage their business to elicit a declaration like this from her father. She was right. Today, 3 important potential clients pulled out of their planned partnerships with us. Juliet's father was holding himself with the air of exhaustion, as if he was sick and tired of battling nervous clientele. But Juliet saw through the guise. Her eyes skidded over to him and traced the tense lines of her mother's stiff shoulders across the room. They were furious. They had been betrayed. "They knew of our pricing before it had even been proposed," Lord Kai continued. "They went to the White Flowers instead. Doubtlessly after the White Flowers had approached them with lower prices. And how could a spy know of such protected information unless they were in the inner circle? This wasn't the work of a messenger who had vague ideas regarding drop-off locations. This was the very core of Scarlet business. In it had sprung a leak. "I know all of your backgrounds," Lord Kai went on. "I know you were all born and bred of Shanghai. Your blood runs thousands of years back to ancestors who link us together. If there is a traitor here, you have not been turned by true loyalty or anything of that caliber, but rather by the promise of money, or glory, or false love, or merely by the thrill of playing spy. But I assure you—" He settled back into a seat and reached for the teapot. He refilled a ceramic cup, his hand completely steady as the leaves overflowed by the very, very brim, spilling onto the red tablecloths and staining it until the darkness looked like a bloom of blood. If he poured any longer, Juliet feared the hot tea would spill down the side of cloth and burn her legs. "When I uncover who you are, the consequences by my hand will be far greater than that of the White Flowers may do upon the notification that you will no longer act the traitor." To Juliet's relief, Lord Kai finally set the pot down just before the overspill reached the edge of the table. Her father was smiling, but his eyes, despite the aged crinkle of crow's feet, stayed as blank as an executioner's. In this moment, Lord Kai didn't choose verbal words to deliver his message. He let his expression speak for him. There was no doubt which parent Juliet had received her monstrous smile from. "Please," Lord Kai said, when nobody moved after the close of his threat, "let us continue eating." Slowly, by the powerful men and the wives who whispered into their ears picked up their chopsticks again. Juliet couldn't quite sit still anymore. She leaned toward her father and whispered that she had to run to the washroom. When Lord Kai nodded, Juliet rose, making for the door. Outside the Scarlet Gang's private room, Juliet leaned against the cold wall, taking a second to catch her breath. She saw the other patrons of the restaurant to her left, where the volume was at a roar, a collective effort of different small tables, each fighting to be heard over the others. To her right, there were separate doorways leading to the kitchen and the washrooms. With a sigh, Juliet marched into the washroom. "Calm yourself," she told herself, leaning her head against the large metal sink. She drooped her neck, breathing deeply. What would her father say if he knew that she was working with Roma Montagov? Would he see it the way she did, that giving up this one point of pride could help all of their people if they managed to stop the madness? Or would he get stuck in the very core of Juliet's betrayal, that she had unlimited chances to shoot Roma in revenge for all the blood on his hands had spilled, and hadn't? Juliet pulled her chin up, facing the distorted bronze mirror before her. All she saw was a stranger. Perhaps she was in her head. Perhaps the correct course of action was to break off any alliance with Roma Montagov and go to her own people instead, to figure out a way to corner Walter Dexter with a brute manpower and make him talk. A scream pierced her ear. Juliet startled, registered as it's coming from the main restaurant. She barged out of the washroom. In seconds, she had hurried to the source of the scream, panting for breath as she searched for victims. She found only one man collapsed to the ground. Her eyes landed on him at the same second that his hands launched around his neck. But nobody went forward to help him. Even as he tore into his throat, littering chunks of skin outward along a small radius and eventually stilling into death, the people of the restaurant continued on. Only one elderly lady at the back waved down a waiter to clean the scene. Some others had hardly flinched, acting as if they had not noticed, as if not acknowledging death would offend it enough to give it away. Civilians were ripping out their own throats, and the people of this city had become so desensitized that they were content to continue their dinner like any regular Tuesday. Juliet supposed it was. If this continued, it would be the norm until the whole city collapsed. It was only a matter of time until every small establishment in Shanghai emptied out, either because their customers had succumbed to the madness or because others wished not to attend places where infections were likely. A matter of time until Scarlet-assisted businesses ate through their savings and could no longer make rent, even despite Tyler's threats, until large restaurants of this size crumbled too. There were red noses sprouting forward on every second door along Scarlet territory. Warning upon warnings. But what good were warnings in the face of madness? "Hey," Juliet snapped when the waiter crouched near the dead man. "Don't touch him." Her tone scared the waiter enough to send him scrambling back. "Put a tablecloth over the body and call a doctor." Nothing was a guarantee. She needed Roma's help to fix the city. But she also needed to stop spinning around and making excuses. She needed to weasel her way besides Paul Dexter. At this hour, it was hard to find the line of the horizon, where the waters ended and the land began, where the Hongpu River bled into the bank on the other side. When Benedict was sitting by the water's edge looking out into the night, it was easy to forget the swirling concoction of red and gold and smoke and laughter that existed in the city behind him. It was easy to believe that this was all there was, an unshaped land blotted with the faintest dots of glitter from the other bank. "I thought I would find you here." Benedict turned to the voice, letting his legs swing over the boardwalk. The light had framed Marshall stung in Benedict's unadjusted eyes when he looked upon him. "It is not like I go anywhere else." Marshall shoved his hands into his pockets. He was dressed nicely in a western suit tonight, which was rare but not unusual. Not if Lord Montagov had just sent him somewhere on an errand. "Do you know how long the Huangpu River is?" "You're picky, Ben. I don't think I've ever found you in the same spot twice." Beneath them, the river seemed to rock in response, and knew that it was being gossiped about. "Did something happen?" Benedict asked. "Were you expecting something to happen?" Marshall replied, coming to sit beside him. "Something is always happening." Marshall pursed his lips. He thought for a second. "No, nothing happened," he said finally. "When I left him, Roma was drafting a reply to a message from Juliet. He's been at it for 3 hours. I think he's going to pull a muscle." Roma did nothing half-heartedly. Whenever he visited Elisa's bedside, he would stay for almost half the day. His other tasks be damned. The only reason Lord Montagov allowed such inactivity from him was because he knew Roma would enact his other tasks with his full intention eventually, as soon as he left the hospital. "Better to pull a muscle than pull out his own throat," Benedict muttered. He stopped. "I don't trust her." "Juliet?" Benedict nodded. "Of course you don't," Marshall said. "You shouldn't. It doesn't mean she's not useful. It doesn't mean you have to dislike her." He gestured toward the alleyway. "Can we go home now?" Benedict sighed, but he was already getting up, dusting off his hands. "You could have gone home on your own, Mars." "Where's the fun in that?" Benedict would never understand how often Marshall needed to be surrounded by people. Marshall was allergic to lonesomeness. He had once genuinely developed a rash because he sat down in his room and forbade himself from leaving until he balanced an account book. Benedict was the opposite. People made him sticky. People made him think that his words twice as hard and sweat when he didn't pick them right. "I don't suppose you're in the mood to stop by a casino first?" Marshall asked when they were starting to walk, grinning. "I heard there's—" Mid-speech, Marshall suddenly halted in his steps, throwing an arm out to snag Benedict's back. Benedict needed a few seconds to see why they had stopped. He needed a few more to truly comprehend what he was seeing. A shadow, stretching on the pavement in front of them. They were still midway outside the alleyway, too deep inside to look past the tall buildings on either side and determine what was making the looming shadow. The street lamp was not far. The outline shining down was stark and well-defined, leaving no mistake for the sight of horns, for limbs that moved with a pained stagger, for a size that was incomprehensible for anything natural. Shadoviche. Monster. The same one that all of Shanghai had been seeing lurking in the city's corners. "Good God," Benedict muttered. The shadow was moving toward them, toward their very alleyway. "Hide!" "Hide?" Marshall hissed in echo. "You want me to magically shrink myself?" Indeed, the alleyway was too thin to offer a viable hiding spot, but there was a wide blue tarp lying atop the discarded wooden boxes. There was no time to give instruction. Benedict grabbed the tarp and pushed Marshall down roughly, shushing him when Marshall winced, and folded himself down too, until they were curled up alongside the boxes and hidden under the thin sheet. Something heavy passed through the alleyway. It sounded ephemeral, like feet that did not quite come down right, like nostrils that were too thin to pass breath, so only a wheeze could come out. Then a rough splash of water rang into the night. Droplets came down into the river surface, as if it had started raining oddly in one section of the city. "What was that?" Marshall hissed. "Did it jump in the water?" Benedict grabbed a corner of the tarp, slowly inching his head out into the open. Marshall gripped his shoulders and tried to do the same, until both of them were peering out of their hiding place, squinting into the dark, trying to get a look at the river beating on the other end of the alleyway. A shape was floating in the water. Under the moonlight, it was hard to catch much except the glint of what could have been the spine, rows of prostrus that were distorting and changing, and Benedict swore, pushing Marshall down. "Hide, hide, hide!" A burst of movement erupted from the water. From the monster. Miniature dots, spitting into the air, barely visible until they landed on the boardwalk, barely visible until they skittered forward under the moonlight, looking like the moving carpet spreading into the alleyway. Marshall yanked the tarp up, and Benedict slammed his foot down on the edge of it, pressing the tarp hard onto the ground, lest the insects crawl through. There was the sound of skittering, the sound of 1,000 little legs brushing up against the rough gravel, dispersing into the city. Silence. A long minute passed. The silence only continued. "I think they're gone," Benedict whispered. "Mars?" Marshall made a choking sound. "Marshall!" Benedict moved fast enough to disrupt the air around him. He placed his hands on both sides of Marshall's face, squeezing hard to demand Marshall's attention and sanity. Squeezing hard in case he needed to stop him from clawing himself to death. But instead of falling into madness, Marshall snorted. A beat later, an amused laugh escaped. "Ben, I'm only kidding." Benedict stared at Marshall. "Modoc," he hissed angrily. When he took his hands back, he had to resist the urge to hit Marshall. "What's wrong with you? Why would you joke on such a matter?" Marshall appeared confused now, like he didn't understand the fury between being thrown in his direction. "They hadn't crawled upon us," he said slowly. "Why would you take me seriously?" "Why wouldn't I?" Benedict snapped. "You don't joke about that, Marshall. I will not lose you." Marshall blinked. He tilted his head curiously, in the same way he usually did when he was trying to predict Marshall's next move during a sparring match. In a true match, Benedict had always been better at predicting Marshall's lazy things, tracking Marshall's guesswork, and acting the opposite. But here, While they sat nose to nose, he would never have expected Marshall to reach out and touch his cheek, the brush of a finger feather soft, as though to test whether Benedict was really there. Benedict jerked away. He tore the tarp off them, getting to his feet in a whirlwind of motion. "I need to tell Roma what we saw," he snapped. "I'll see you at home." He hurried off before Marshall could follow. Roma finally sent his letter of reply 5 hours after he started writing it. Once he had to proofread it a 10th time, he wasn't entirely sure why any more whether he had spelled his own name correctly. "Should I have included the patronymic?" he muttered to himself now, flipping to the next page of his book without taking in any of the words. "Is that strange?" The whole thing was too strange. 4 years ago he had sent Juliet so many love letters that when he sat down to write this letter, to agree that they should gather as much information as possible from their separate sources on Walter Dexter before meeting in Great World tomorrow, his immediate reaction upon scribbling "Dear Juliet" was to make a comparison of her hair to a raven. Roma sighed, then put the book down into his chest, closing his eyes. He was already lying on his bed. He figured he may as well take a nap until it was time for them to go sticking his nose into the white flower factories. Someone there had to have information on Walter Dexter's ongoings. But the moment he started dozing, there was a heavy thudding in his bedroom door. Roma groaned. "What is it?" The door opened. Benedict come barreling in. "Do you have a moment?" "You're interrupting my quality time with Eugene Onegin, but that's quite all right." Roma removed his book from his chest and set it down on his blanket. "He's unnecessarily pretentious, anyway." "The monster, the insects, they're one and the same." Roma bolted up. He demanded, "Say again." Benedict took a seat on his cousin's desk, his anxiety releasing through the rapid tapping of his fingers. Roma, on the other hand, had scrambled up and started to pace the entirety of his bedroom. There was too much tension building up between his bones. "The insects come from the monster," Benedict said in a rush. "We saw it. We saw it leap in the water, and then—" He mimed an explosion outward. "The nonsense all makes sense now. Those who say that sightings of the monster create the madness are correct, just not in the way they think. The monster makes the insects make the madness." Roma was suddenly very short of breath. Not in panic, but in understanding, as if he had been presented with a gift box of information, disassembled in little pieces, and if he didn't put it together quickly enough, the gift would be taken away. "This is colossal," Roma said, forcing himself to go slowly. "If we trust Lawrence when he says these insects operate identically to one another, if we assume that they are all being controlled by one entity, and one entity is in fact the monster—" Roma stopped pacing. He almost dropped to his knees. The monster was real. Real, and it wasn't that he hadn't believed the sightings prior to this moment, but he accepted them the way he accepted the foreigners and the concessions, as something of an inconvenience, but not his biggest threat. The sightings were outside his field of concern, secondary to the madness, but now— "If we kill the monster, we kill each and every one of these particular insects in Shanghai. If we kill the monster, we stop the madness. Then the insects embedded in Elisa will die. Then she would no longer be under the clutches of the madness. Then she could wake up again. It was as good as a cure." Benedict thinned his lips. "You say that as if it'll be easy. You didn't see it." Roma paused his pacing. "Well, what did you see?" A loaded quiet set in the room. Benedict seemed to consider his answer. He tapped his knuckles against the desk a few times, then did it again for a good measure. Finally, he gave his head a minuscule shake. "You've heard the stories," Benedict replied tightly. "They're not so far off from the truth. I wouldn't worry about its appearance yet. Before we can even consider killing it, how do we find it again?" Roma resumed his pacing. "Marshall said the communists saw it coming from Zangutai's apartment." If Roma had been paying close enough attention, he could have seen his cousin's expression suddenly crumple. Not in a grimace or a sneer, but rather a flash of pain. It was fortunate that all Montagovs knew how to switch to a blank stare in the blink of an eye. By the time Roma glanced over, Benedict had resumed a neutral expression, waiting for his cousin to continue. I need you and Marshall to stake out Zangutai's apartment, Roma decided. The plan was coming together while he talked, each piece sliding in mere moments after the one before he had clicked. Watch for any appearance of a Chushivi. Confirm to me that Zangutai is guilty. If you see the monster appear with your own 2 eyes, then we know he is controlling it to spread madness across Shanghai. Then we know how to find the monster to kill it, by finding Zangutai. This time Benedict did grimace plainly. You wish for me to watch? That sounds tedious. I would worry for your safety if it were exciting work. The more boring, the better off you are. Benedict shook his head. You bored us enough searching for a live victim of the madness, and look where that got us, he said. Why can't you and Juliet do it? You're already in the investigation. I have my own life to tend to, you know. Roma narrowed his eyes. Benedict crossed his arms. Is there something about this assignment that is too much of an ask? Roma wondered. What is his resistance to it? Is it merely another chance to goof off with Marshall, which he does on a daily basis anyway? I won't waste our collaboration with Juliet on stalking Zangutai, Roma answered, sounding offended in the notion. I thought this monster was our concern, not the Larkspur. I know that, Roma shot back. He was bristling, unable to hold the sharpness of his tone. Elisa's life was at stake. He did not have the energy to debate such petty manners. But we cannot be certain Zangutai is truly linked to the monster until we see something. Until then, we need an alternate plan for answers on the monster and its madness. Until then, we need to get to the bottom of this Larkspur figure so we can gather why he knows what he knows and use it to get back at the monster. But Benedict was still insisting on digging his foot in. You cannot stalk Zangutai after you find the Larkspur. Obviously, he is linked with him in some fashion if you find correspondence between them. Benedict, Roma said firmly. It was only one correspondence from the Larkspur's end. He shook his head. His cousin was sidetracking him. Look, you and Marshall have to do it because we don't know how long it could take for the monster to make an appearance. Can't you just tell a lower-ranked gangster to keep an eye on him? Benedict. And truly, you only need one person to do this task. Are you, Roma interrupted, his tone suddenly cold, a white flower or not? That shut him up. Benedict clamped his lips together, then said, Of course. So stop arguing against my command. Roma placed his hands behind his back. Is that all? Benedict stood. He made a mock bow. His mouth twisted sourly. Yes, cousin, he said. I'll have you to do your air duties now. Make sure not to overly exert yourself. A gust of wind followed his fast escape. The slam of the door echoed loudly enough to shake the house. Air duties. What a jokester. Benedict knew full well that Roma could either be the heir or be a ghost. Benedict might have been one of the only people who actually understood that Roma did not fight so hard to remain heir because he enjoyed the power, but because it was the only place he could control his personal safety. If the heavens opened and offered Roma a little villa on the outskirts of the country, where he could move himself and his loved ones out to live a life in obscurity, he would choose it immediately. Benedict's dig rolled right off Roma's shoulders. His cousin could complain all he liked and take his anger out on Roma, but he was too logical to dismiss the task outright. He would do it and complain like the hell about it, then shut up when it mattered. Besides, Benedict could not grumble for long. Whatever had knotted his intestines in such a state was bound to loosen soon, and then he would forget why he threw such a fit. Roma sighed and flopped back onto the bed. He had always known that sitting at the top came with its prickles and thorns. But in this city, void of any alternative path, at least this was better than not being heir at all. Later that night, a knock came down on Kathleen's door, startling her from her reading. She was snuggled into her blankets already, half considering feigning sleep so she would not need to get up, put her pendant on, and answer the door, when the door simply opened on its own. "Thank you for waiting on my response," she droned, eyeing Rosalind as she came in. "You weren't going to open it," her sister replied knowingly. Kathleen grimaced, closing the magazine she was reading. She supposed this season's latest shoe designs could wait. "I might have been asleep." Rosalind looked up. She pointed at the small chandelier and then at the 3 golden lamps scattered upon the room. You sleep with lights on? Psst, baby. With a roll of her eyes, Rosalind sat down on the foot of her bed. She seemed to gaze at nothing for a long while before drawing her legs up to her chest and resting her face delicately on the flat surface of her knees. Kava? Kava, Rosalind sighed. Lord Kai scared me tonight. Me too. It was a mighty big claim to insist a spy had made its way into the Scarlet Inner Circle. The circle was only so big. We have enough trouble with people dying. This is going to divide even further. Rosalind made a noise. It could have been one of agreement. It could have been nothing but a need to clear her throat. Another few seconds passed by. Then she asked, You don't think it's Juliet, do you? Kathleen's eyes widened. No, she exclaimed. Why would you even think that? Rosalind thinned her lips. I was just thinking out loud. You've heard the same rumors as I have. Juliet would never. The air was getting a little thick. Kathleen hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected a weary silence to follow them. She wanted agreement instead. You can't be too trusting all the time. I am not too trusting, Kathleen snapped, prickled now. Oh, really? Rosalind shot back. The volume of their voices was growing. What is this quick need for defense, then? I was just throwing the possibility out there, and you're acting like I'm biting your head off. Talk is dangerous, Kathleen cut in. You know this. You know what a few thoughtless words can do. Who cares what talk can do? She's Juliet. Kathleen jerked against her nest of blankets, shocked. Her ears were ringing, like her sister's outburst had been an explosion rather than an exclamation. Though they were both close to Juliet, Rosalind's relationship to their cousin was different than hers. Rosalind and Juliet were too similar. They both coveted the leading role, the right to have the ultimate decision. When they clashed, only one could be right. But this wasn't a clash. This was just... God, I'm sorry, Rosalind said suddenly, her voice softening. I'm sorry. I love Juliet. You know I do. I'm scared, okay? And we don't have the same safety as she does. Lord Kai is going to stop at nothing to find out who's acting the traitor, and you know he'll suspect outsiders like us first. Kathleen stiffened. We're hardly outsiders. But we're not Kais at the end of the day. Much as Kathleen hated it, her sister was right. It mattered little that they were closely related to the beating core of the Kais than the other second, third, fourth cousins. So long as their last name was different, there would always be that doubt in the family over whether Rosalind and Kathleen truly belonged here. They came from Lady Kai's side, the side that had been brought into the house rather than the side that had been raised in it for generations. I guess we need to be careful then, Kathleen mumbled. Make sure we have no reason to be accused. People like Tyler would not have to worry. Even if they were all just as related, he bore the Kai name. Anything he did, anything he achieved was something wonderful, reflecting back on the family, on the generations of ancestors who had built them from the ground up. Anything Kathleen and Rosalind were a part of reflected back on the Langs instead. And Kathleen knew absolutely nothing about the side of her family history, short of the grandmother she visited once a year. Yeah, Rosalind whispered. She sighed, scrubbing her forehead. Okay, I should go. I'm sorry for yelling. She hopped off the bed. Get some sleep, bonne nuit. Good night, Kathleen echoed. The door had already closed. When she lay back down and picked up her magazine again, she could no longer return her attention to the shoes. You've heard the same rumors as I have. Wait, Kathleen whispered aloud. What rumors?